እምነታትን ብሄራትን ኣለውና እዚ ማሕበር ንኩሉ ብማዕረይ እንገድ ዝኮረዩ ተበዲልና ዝብሉ ዝተፈላለዩ ፖለቲካዊ ረኣያ ዝተቀያየሙ ኣብ ሕሉፍ ኣተሓሳስባ ደው ዝበሉ ፅልኢ ምንዛሕ ከም ጅግንነት ዝቆፅሩ ወፍሪ ሰላም ከም ኣማራፂ ስነ ሓሳብ ሰላም ጥራይ ብምእንጋድ ንኣብ ደገ ዘሎ ህዝብናን زعرف سلام راي زميتلو وتعب እምነታትን ብሄራትን ኣለውና ክቡራት ተኸታተልትና ኣቀዲምና ብጥዕናኹም ፅቡቅ ኣብ ስራሕኩም ኣሳልጦ ከምኡ ከዓ ሓጎስ ኣብ መዓልቶም እንነብረኹም እንዳተመነና ሳስባ ደው ዝበሉ ፅልኢ ምንዛሕ ከም ጅግንነት ዝቆፅሩ ወፍሪ ሰላም ከም ኣማራፂ ስነ ሓሳብ ሰላም ጥራይ ብምእንጋድ ንኣብ ደገ ዘሎ ህዝብናን زعرف سلام راي زميتلو وتعب وفر سلام ويكا بمحزنات قرابة زفلت محبر كابز مسرطات حيزو كساب زعلت زيئة أب حقرنان كبابينا نزلو سقعت سلام بمزنعة دالالي كابزوخون عينة بوليتيكا ويخون حيمانوتا وناس أخوينو أبت زبزحة ترهيواتنا مرحز خيد حزبي اندا توكورة استفل عليه ندفتات اندا كايلي يركب وفر سلام بار لازم سحج اوان عالمنا قاد إموازلو حدقا كورونا فيروس نمكات حزبنا زقبع حبريتان تمرتم انت خركب نحكمنا خيلاتات كاب إرتران إثيوبيان بموكاس بملكة كونفرنس لحزب أقل قلوت عم هابي يركب أبز حلف أوان CPR سلطانان نايدرار مشات نسقروا بالتحوات زبلن كان استفل عليه نتفتات النكايدة أمون غوزي تفل عليه سنحا حو قربيت ركب أم دلدالن قسلو أم حوين زكالو ترايت أود تقباراوي حساباوي سراح أب عبيس تمركوسي أب سلام زلو وصلواز أبو مردعكا أبز حج أوان سلام إنفستمنت كلاب بمخفات قربا بالتحبيرهم نمز أزعلمي أم مخسبن موفارن إنكساقسو أب سلام زقبر ركبات معرخ ندي وصيتا مخانو زري بتكبار أبنتا وسرح يسرحو إذا محبر زي بالباو دليت سلامن رهوان أب أحقورنا بزمنيو قدينا مو نقبر بزبل حبو كوانتا تمسرتا أب حتير بزيقن نهيز بخوينو نفسو كفتواسا أي سلام أنا انتيا بركيتا زبلالو مدرخ كويني ركب وفر سلام بستفل عليه من قدن مخنياتن نفس الدزوتو هيواتهم بستمزابلو بمخنيات حلوف تاريخ سل إذا حضرهم زيجاتات من حبحب أبسنا حساب سلام تؤمناتو كيرهم المزاج إذا حش عدل المفتاح نقدمت إذا سبقمو حسابات السلاسل أبستفل عليه مويان تمرتن توافيرهم هيواتهم زمر زيجاتاتون أبترف جزيهم نعب حجرهم زلو حسرتات زحق زلو بايتا يفتر أبو غيت حزرة أب حبراوي بهدن دمدن لزق مدرخ بالمفتار قربا بتتوصلنا زي بلو أما كبار سمركو سركبا زكايدو العدلات يفتر أب إيرتران إثيوبيان بفلايكا أب إيرتران تجراين كان دي أتوكيرنا نسرحلو استفل عليه إمنتاتن بهيراتن علونا إذا محبر نخل بمعري إنجد زخريو تبديلنا زبلو استفل عليه بوليتيكا والرأي السقايمو أب حلوف أتحساسبا دو زبلو تسأل منزح كم جبنة نزقزرو وفر سلام كمان مراتي سنة حسب سلام تراي بما إنجد نعب دقا زلو حسبنان زعبا سلام تراي زميتلو وتعرفت حنقوليو نتوم دوب كيتحنصص انتي امصوزي نزبلو وغنات كا ملسنا نمنغستن بوليتيكانينا نزبلو وغنات نحدغو نبل كم محبر انطالبون بار زي قدس امنت كان بوليتيكاوي صقاخان ولدخ اب سلامن طقمن كسرحي نزبل كله انقعد حنص خيلنا بموق سلامتا نقبل ابالاتنا استفل عليه دحر بايتا زلوم كوينم صل زدكمم بعض زغدلهم جنكا بشم ود بيخون طرنافه زغبرنا يصلقنا زفنفنهم تقانا نايصلمه مدقعت زخون نخوينم هيمانوت يخون بوليتيكاو جيدم ابيتنا لك كم ناي مسجد وي كا بيت كريستيان كناتو ጫማ خوصيخانا بصلوت ጉዳይ ጌርካ ትውድ ኣብ ወፍሪ ሰላም ከኣ ናይ ሰላም ስነ ሓሳብ ጥራይ ዝእንገድ ከም ልምዲ ንፍሉይ ዝበለ ኣተሓሳስባ ብሕልፊ ኣብቲ ቀንዲ موادبت زخانة حزب إيرتران تجراين نوبي حجزة خوينات زسعبو كبير بأسين مفواس تجبر فتنة قليل كم زي كونات صدقنا نجنزب نولدون دات أبكاز جبروا متقعتات شلل لبل نتوم تموالو يخم زبلو عباي موخن رخبان بلوم نتوم أجازيان تجراي تجريني يخم زبلو الأمانة نسوخم زي كونا دار رجعنا كباب شافكم كمعزب أتيكم كتريو مفتح زي بلو كفوت جزا سلامي لبلكم بزقات أمي لازم قدس علامة بمدقاف أبلاتنا نخدكونو بخبرنا عدم نمرحت حقرات إيرتران إثيوبيان كا تبقشنا ترديكم أقول نخدكونو من حسان أمود أتوفر سلام على ما وزرقح خوينو حقاوي سيفيكا ومحبر أب أمريكا زمدبر إيو وفر سلام ميازي عسران شدشتن كلتشحن إسران
Dr. Nagasi?
እየመጣ ነው።
Next trip with free cancellation on hotels.com.
Professor.
Go wrong with hotels.com.
እያስገባቸው ነውና እንደ አቶ የምስተፋላለ እና እንደገና ወደ ዩቲዩብ ምናምን ያስተላለፍኩት ነው ወደ ፌስቡክ ለዚህ ነው ትንሽ ትግስት እንድንሰጣችሁ
ስሙን እንዲቀይሩት ነው MEHA007 የሚለው
ምንድነው
ስሙ የኔ ስም እዚህ ጋር MEHA007 ነው የሚለው ህዝቅያስ አሰፋ ብለው ይቀይሩት
የት ላይ
የኔ ኢሜጅ ከኢሜጁ ስር ስሜ ሲመጣ MEHA007 ነው የሚለው
ኦኬ ሪኔም ላርጎ ኦኬ ምን ልበለው
እና ህዝቅያስ አሰፋ ይበሉት HIZKIAS ስፔስ ASSEFA
እሺ ጥሩ
እሺ
سلام ديمقراطي نسب نواد سب سلام ديمقراطي سلام مقرت يا وزاير رايا ولدن ولادن يتفلالن يا أرد رينا وعكسي باري كفا سيدا مغير بابر ولق حالفا لملم فاوي غجام كتما بحرنا أي فاسر كتما نبرتاوان وندر زين التحالاتان حولنا تفضلنا مسرات سلامي وبطريقنا مسرات سلامي وبطريقنا
We're on Pride to get on the best.
هلو لسمنا في طاوان فقر سلامي ولدتنا عنكم أنت سلام ملخي أنت سلام ملخي كل التدقنا نواريخي ولدن ولده لبالعي عد عوض كيرو عد مرعى عد عبيتي عد منسينيرو عد مرعى عد تستينيرو عد تعام أنت تقول سلام يبلالو
thank you كما يوعلكم أحوات كاب استفالة كفل العالم آتيكم زرلهم قاليهم كما يمسيهم بار كبر قاشانا بروفيسور اسكياس مسانا لو لما عنتي تبق وعلى خلو النايب نسوها باستفالة أقات أمتات تتكيمنا نحبرة سبنا كمهور زغلو لباماتن عبيتن فلاتاتن نحبرة سبنا ندعدمنا نقبرو ناي أستمرون ناي ممياتن جزئي لما عنتي سلازبو مسرد ما بروفيسور اسكياز لما عنتي ريد خوينا مالو بزخونة كلمة كله مجمارنا تي لينك شير بورو بفيسبوك تحلال فالو كمون ب يوتيوب ونتحلال فالو كامبين فور بيس لكم دحراتهم يوتيوب لايف التحلال سلازلو شير بورو ناب كله كبات أحمد انتاين سلازي اندحر دا عدل كوكم دليهم حدا سلسة ويكلتا دا كوكم يشير نخد قبرو بخوامو غيرنا نتي مكتي نابز بزح احواتنا خنبات احنا بورمو بسترفة كبور قاشانا بروفيسور ريدي امزلونا عهاتكم حسابو من زلوم سنة حساب ككافلونا ريدي كتكونوا شير نخد قبرو حدا خلت دا زخون عدل كوكم يمو وترديكم تزدلي شير كتقبرو تحبابرو بزقات امزلنا حدثكم كرم جمارنا كلت سلسلة أوسيدكم كاونيو هنجمرينا مالتي. Thank you.
What's she doing?
I'll check.
Huh?
This creepy guy continues her FaceTime.
Don't FaceTime anyone. Why do you give them your phone?
Huh?
Why do you put your phone?
Because when we talk, I don't like chatting on.
سلام ديمقراطي نسب نواد سب سلام ديمقراطي سلام مكرت يا وضعين رايا ولدن ولادن يتفلالن يا حرد ريراوا عكسي باري كفا سيدا مري البابر ولك حريفا لملم باوي غجاب كتما بحرنا اي فاسل كتما دبرتاوان ونر زين التحالات حولنا وطرتنا مسرات سلامي وكل طريقنا مسرات سلامي وكل طريقنا تدخلونا يعلو حزبنا في طاوون فقر السلامي وردتنا عنكم أنت سلام ملخي أنت سلام ملخي كل التدقنا نواريخي كل ولا دهنا بالغي عد عوض فيرو عد مرعى عد عبيتي عد منسين يروح عد مرعى عد تستين يروح عد تعام أنت تقولنا يا هلو حزبنا سلام يبلالو
Thank you. Thank you مبار بزغونة ني تا بروفيسور تا شير استاب ورا بناتكم سايد استاب شيري كساعة تجمرو اوكي سلازي سمعكم دولو دمتي مجمرتا دمتي خرجت كاب حد حواتنا دمتي صبغ يلن زبل سلاز مصن مالتي دمتي سمعكم دولو اسكي كسايكورني جمارنا يقدح كاس لزولو صبغ كود سمنتاي دمتي
ولا حاجة دمتي صبغ
الله اوكي ثانك يو سيرا بروفيسور اسكياس صبغ سمعكم الله
Yes.
اوكي صبغ كالوت كلاتكم صبغ سمعكم الله ندحر نلحن تخساي زي قبركم لي صبغ سمعكم كم زل يخوصدو مالتي سلازي ثانك يو حوات كم تزولكم مقدمه باستفالالي كابستفالالي كفل العالم اتيكم زلهم قال لهم كما يوعلكم قال لهم كما امسيهم قال لهم كاخمي حديركم يزخون سلازي كوعد حن مصاهم ناب كامبين فور بيس نايلو معنتي ناي ننحنا نغبرو ناي ميميات كم تزبلكم ابزي اب ورحي توحد حدا غزي وي كاب كنتسومن زتفالاليو ناي حبرتسبنا لبامات عبيتي كومون مهورات فلات اتومكرو زلوم دامصنا نعنا نتزلوم سنا حساب زلوم كلت ككافلونا مسانا نخمايتو بحلف اب سلام اتوكيرنا سلام اب حبرت السبات بخمي كمص خيل زبل حسب نزغربلنا استمرون زبنا حنقو فايلو زما حبرزي ناي سلام هواه نخلو حبرت السبنا بزتقال متن زصعر حبرت السبن كقرارب زفتن محبر كوينو لما انت دما كبر بو متن كبر غاشانا بروفيسور اسكياس اسفا ابستف على في العالم مالتي كاب ايثيوبيا جميركم اب بزحات هاجرات ني افريكا كومون نا اوروبا كومون اب امريكاون بتفلالي اكسبيرينس بتفلالي صفح زسرحو مكر حونا لما انتي نعناها بزعبا نايتي سنه حساب سلام كمي غير كافتر كاو حليفون كونفليكت افويد نمغبار زلو دحر بايتاتات نخبلونا استخاتاتالي استمرتات نخوبنا زتدالو ايانا حاونانيم نزقا ناي مجمرتا معلت خوينو تمسرتاوي ادلاي زبولولو معن تخوبيم بكم تتفولطو كم ستاندرد نايزي كامبين فور بيس ويك او فور سلام بعلم اللاليم نفسهم مساقاتكم كجمرو اتي استمرو عدل كنوبينا بمسرتو برايمرلي اتي انجليشن كالو قنقاتاتن سلازقلهم اتي استمرو برايمرلي بانجليش يخون اسخاتكم كن كتحات تدليهم تجرينيا تدليهم بامحرنيا تدليهم بانجليش كتحاتكم تقولوا مكور ايانا بروفيسور اسكياس فقط فلكسبيليتي كم زهاونا بزقات ام زندا نبركو نحنا ون زي برهن تولو كلاريفاي كم غبرو ممكن تحقاقزن تزدلي فلتت حزنا نخوص بمتناي لما عنتي بار مدرخ اني كبور بروفيسور اسكياس مدرخ كغود في مالتي سلازي نفسكم الله عليهم بروفيسور تحسكم حسكم ان تقربوا بزقات ام زي مايكروفون نباهم غود فولكم دل بخبي ثانك يو
Okay. Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
First of all, I really would like to express my deep appreciation for your invitation to be with you today and to have this opportunity to have a deep discussion about what has been going on in our region and what are the kinds of things that we can do together to find better ways of handling whatever are causing this conflicts and this destructive relationship between us. And this is indeed a wonderful opportunity to do that. and I appreciate having the chance to make this presentation today and to be part of your journey, a long journey indeed, but I feel extremely encouraged by what I hear about what your group is trying to do and to be part of it. In the interest of time, I would just delve directly into the program for the day. As you well know, the program today is divided into two parts. One is the presentation. The other one is a kind of a seminar kind of discussion, to the extent that we have adequate time to do that. The presentation is called Building Blocks for Overcoming Destructive Conflict and Constructing Lasting Peace. And it's going to be done in different parts, and I would explain in more detail what I mean by different parts as we go along. By the way, are you hearing me?
Professor, yeah, we can hear you. The voice is good. Would you please announce, introduce yourself to the audience before you proceed to the presentation?
Yes, I'm going to do that. That's actually the next part, the agenda for the day. The agenda for our day starts with introduction, and then we talk about our aim, my ideas of where do we want to go with this kind of discussion, and to talk then about the process we're going to use in this process of discussion and dialogue, and talk about the ground rules that would guide not only our discussion, but our journey forward, and then have the substantive presentation to be followed by discussion. This is the agenda we're going to follow. The introduction, I would do self-introduction. It would have been very good to hear the introduction from the participants, but probably we don't have time. At least during the discussion, we'll ask participants to say something about themselves before they make an input or ask questions, and at least we'll get to know some of you, if not everybody. So let me start then with a self-introduction. The moderator asked me to take some time to talk a little bit in great detail about my background so that people have the benefit of understanding where I'm coming from. What is the basis for saying what it is that I'm saying? There is a saying which says, you stand where you sit. If you sit here where I am seated now, I cannot stand 10 meters away from where I am sitting. I have to move to that place. I have to walk, or whatever means, I have to be there. But when I stand immediately, I stand where I sit. In other words, in order for you to help you understand where I'm standing on these kinds of things, it would help to explain where I sit on some of these issues. So it is with that in mind that I would do this self-introduction. To begin with, my name is Kias Asafa. I was born in Dese, Wollo, in central Ethiopia. And as many of you know, that is a melting pot in Ethiopia where different ethnicities, different religions, different cultural backgrounds coexist. And it had been a great privilege being born and being bred in that kind of environment where is this you? Is this you, Dr. Nagase?
Yeah, I start recording.
Okay. So it is in this environment that I grew up, and I think to a certain extent, it might have influenced my attitude towards coexistence, towards tolerance, and eventually to peace and the kind of work that I'm doing. Professionally speaking, I wear two hats. One hat is an academic hat. I am a professor at a university in Virginia, which is called Eastern Mennonite University. We have a graduate program in conflict transformation, and I was one of the original founders of this program about 30 some years ago. So I teach, I'm a professor in that program. Particularly, we have an institute where we invite people from different parts of the world who are engaged in peacemaking, and we give them intensive training about understanding peace and also methodology and tools of peace. And so I teach in that program. Also, I have done other academic programs in the United States, like visiting a professor at George Mason University and Brandeis University, and so on. The second part of my professional career is I am a practitioner. What that means is I try to implement what I teach. The arrangement that I have with the university that I teach, in which I teach, is when I don't teach courses, I have the flexibility to travel to different parts of the world where conflict is ongoing, and then try to see whether some of the things that we teach in that program really work or not. Try to apply them in real life and see if there is any validity to them. And therefore try to bring the theory from the classroom to actual conflicts going on in the field. And then to take insights gained from the field back to the classroom so that what we teach becomes informed by what we observe in the real world. So in this way, I am involved in three kinds of activities. The first activity is called political mediation. This means trying to work with parties in conflict, particularly between governments and insurgency groups that are involved in civil war conflicts, and trying to engage in behind-the-scene, quiet efforts to help both sides move from warfare towards negotiation and eventually towards some kind of settlement of their conflict. The recent activity that I have been engaged in this way is South Sudan, where I mediated between the government of Southern Sudan and an insurgency group, which was called Southern Sudan Democratic Movement, which was led by General Yao Yao, a conflict that has been going on for quite some time, which eventually was settled through mediation, and the agreements that they have signed, thankfully, still holds. Another activity that they have been engaged in was the conflict in Kenya. I don't know how many of you remember, in 2007, 2008, there was a dispute over elections, which eventually exploded into ethnic conflict, which led to terrible massacres. People were worried that Rwanda was going to repeat again in Kenya. I was involved in the mediation of that conflict with Secretary General Kofi Annan, who was the Secretary General of the United Nations, with the African Union, and together as a team, that conflict so that the parties can settle their dispute, can implement different kinds of constitutional reform processes in the country, so that the next election can be based on new foundation that dealt with the underlying conflicts so that the next election could be useful, peaceful. I have been engaged in Rwanda, in Burundi, Liberia, Sierra Leone in this capacity. The second activity that I have been engaged in is called peace building. For lack of a better term, what this means is in situations of violence, massive violence, where conflict has been going on for a long time and peace has been held hostage, particularly by various political elites and political leaders, to mobilize people, to work with people to demand peace. And particularly in situations where brother has turned against brother, neighbor against neighbor, to help people to begin coming together after the violence has ended, after the conflict has ended, which means reconciliation, forgiveness, and so on. I have worked in this capacity again in the countries that I told you, but also outside of Africa, in places like Guatemala, Colombia, and also in places like Sri Lanka, and to some extent in Afghanistan. The third activity is training. I have been working with the United Nations Institute on Training and Research, where we have programs in Norway as well as in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. We bring UN diplomats and train them intensively in negotiation, mediation, and reconciliation. And we have been doing this for the past 20 years plus. And also working with people in actual conflict situations, especially when they are ready to get towards negotiation, how to develop the tools that they could use in that process. So in a nutshell, these are the three activities as a practitioner. My academic background, I was trained as a lawyer in Ethiopia first. At that time, it used to be called Haile Selassie University. I practiced law there. It was very frustrating because at that time the system was very corrupt. Then I felt, well, if I went to so-called developed country and I practiced law, maybe I would be satisfied with my practice. I went for Masters of Law at Northwestern University, Chicago, did my master's, and then joined a law firm in Chicago and practiced for a while. But to my dismay, I found the corruption there too. I find the manipulation there also, except that it was much more sophisticated. It was more invisible. Back home, you could see it for what it is. So eventually I felt, well, I can't thrive in this kind of environment. I left the legal profession and then went to study economics. I thought maybe coming from a third world country, I can make some contribution. Studied economics, got a master's in it. I was delighted by the education, but when it comes to implementing some of those brilliant ideas, economics without politics is like clapping with one hand. So after my master's, I switched to politics and I studied international politics, got a PhD in that. At that time, the field of conflict resolution was just emerging and I specialized in that, and that's where I got my PhD in. Now, when I started working after my graduation, I also found out that politics, economics, law were not enough to work on peace, particularly if you are working on reconciliation. You need insight from other disciplines like philosophy, like deep psychology, like theology. And then I began looking into these disciplines from the back doors. So now I can say my practice is a fusion of insights from all these different disciplines so that we can understand conflict better, we can understand peace better, and hopefully work more effectively at the peacemaking end of this. So in a nutshell, this is the background that I come from. And in my presentation and in our discussion, you would see where the ideas that I would be talking about are coming from. Well, hopefully that gives you some understanding of my background. Now I would like to set out the objectives for not only this presentation, but also my hope for the journey that we are going to do together. The first is to start a dialogue among us here using the building blocks of lasting peace presented in the seminar. In other words, our dialogue should be informed by some of the tools, by some of the perspectives and insights gained here. We're going to try it out among ourselves first. The second objective then says to expand the circle step by step to include others that need to be brought into the dialogue. Peace is not divisible. Peace cannot be seen as bringing together a group of people so that this group then can team together to go against other groups. If that is the case, then the peace between the first groups would be undermined one way or another in the long term. Peace starts probably small, probably in a smaller group, but it has to radiate out more and more and more so that others that have stakes, others that have interests, others that can spoil the peace that is being built are included and they become part of the solution instead of become only a problem. So the second part refers to that, where hopefully we'll begin to be inclusive step by step, because this requires wisdom. If you don't handle it properly, sometimes it can be a problem. But that's what we'll be talking about as we move forward. So these are the objectives that I have in mind. Well, sometimes technology can sabotage us. Now, what is the process that we'll be using to do this? I envisage at this point a process that would have three parts. The part one is what we are doing today now, presenting building blocks and tools that would be useful for our discussion here, for our work among ourselves here today. Part two would be then, so that these ideas don't remain floating up here, in the sky and in the air, we try to apply them to the particular conflicts in our region that we have been observing, that we have been suffering from, and that would wish and hope that they get some kind of resolution. So it's application part. Part three is to look at methods for developing solutions for the underlying conflicts, and then develop a vision for the implementation of the solutions. In other words, it's not enough to just talk about problems. We have also to talk about solutions. The methodology for how we develop solutions is a huge discussion by itself, which we'll get into as we move forward. And also, it's not a solution that only us develop. All other stakeholders at different levels of society would have to be engaged in the solution. And then the solutions would have to be implemented as well. A big frustration is solutions become visible, but they just remain unimplemented, and therefore sometimes we slide back to the conflict that we started from to find a solution for. So we develop a vision, and then in an inclusive manner, try to bring the different stakeholders so that they will be part of that process. So this is what I'm thinking at this point. We'll deal with part one, and probably part two and part three would be subjects for our engagement further down the road as we travel together. Now, as we travel together, there are certain rules, travel posts that should guide our journey together. These are very important. I will mention only three of them today, and more will be presented as time goes by. But for our presentation today, three would be enough. Let me just quickly go over them. The first one, listen before disagreeing. Listen not only with ears, but with the heart. As you have noticed, one of the major impediments for peace in our country is many of us are very good in talking to persuade the other side about our position, about our point of view. Everybody does that, but there is no one listening. So it's a shouting match. In this shouting match, we are forced to take the position that the one that shouts the loudest might be heard. So like a madhouse, all of us are shouting, but one is not. So at least for a change here, we're going to agree, we're going to promise each other that before disagreeing, we are going to be disciplined enough to listen. We might be surprised by what we discover the other party is saying. And then when we listen, there are many ways of listening. One is through this, where the words come through one ear and then goes out through the other. And the other one is with the heart. This is a bit more complicated. Listening to the heart will take a little bit more time later on to explain, to decipher what it means to hear with the heart. The second is to separate the idea from the person. Disagree with the idea, but respect the person. This is again a big problem, a big contributory factor for the lack of peace in our region. That is, if somebody disagrees with me, then I feel the enemy is the person and not just the idea that that person is expressing. This is true in interpersonal conflict. This is true in group conflict. This is true in national conflicts, and so on. We personalize the issues. And if the person is the enemy, and if the conflict is intense, then this attitude pushes us to the situation where the best way to deal with this is to get rid of the idea. How do you get rid of the idea? Get rid of the person that holds the idea, which means eliminate them, which means silence them. And of course, we might be under the illusion that because we did that, the problem will go away. It doesn't. It doesn't. In very strange ways. It appears and reappears, sometimes through generations. So what it is that we're trying to do is, the idea is here over which we disagree. We are here as the people that are holding the ideas. If we respect each other and look at the idea as our common enemy, then it gives us the courage, it gives us the stamina, it gives us the tolerance to work together to deal with this problem over which we are disagreeing. So ultimately, we'll be in a position to find a solution that pleases me, that deals with my problem, and a solution that deals with the other person. That is what it means to respect the other person, but disagree with the idea. Connected with that is number 3. This session and the subsequent session I hope we'll have together is a discussion. It is not a debate. The aim is not to defeat the other side, but to learn, to understand, to have insight, to gain wisdom, to grow. Again, when you look at our region, when you look at our elites, most of us are good at debating, but not very good at discussing. The difference between discussion and debate is very, very big, and it's very important, particularly for the process of peace building and process of construction of peace. Debate is, I take a position, you take a position. My aim is to persuade you by one means or another that my position is better, superior, and you have to surrender your position. I do it in whatever means, by words, hopefully. Otherwise, there are all kinds of techniques of intimidation to silence the other side. But what we forget is silencing the other side does not mean persuading them. Just because they don't have enough words to express their disagreement, or they are afraid to do that, it doesn't mean that they accept my position. And I have only deepened the hostility and the enmity that I have with them. But on the other hand, when we are discussing, it's a completely different attitude. We come to discuss not to win over each other, but to learn from each other. Everybody brings what they have. With all humility, put it on the table. I bring mine, you bring, she brings, everybody brings their ideas. We put it together. We see it together. We get to learn, we get to get an insight about why you believe, what you believe is the solution to this problem that we all see. If I haven't seen it, I appreciate the fact that you helped me see it. If you don't see mine, then I will show you mine. Together we build. We gain insights. We grow. We learn. And it is out of that kind of interaction that we gain wisdom. Again, beginning from me, the elites from our region are knowledgeable, smart people, but very few of us are wise. Wisdom is lacking in all this. If we had wisdom, we couldn't allow this kind of destruction that has preoccupied us for generations and still goes on. What for? What is the bigger picture? What is the end game after all? That is wisdom. That kind of question is a wise question. Well, in our societies, there are people, usually the older generation, that had wisdom in them, and that was what, age meant in our culture. But as we all know, these people have been silenced everywhere. We have taken over. And so we are knowledge-driven, and very few of us are wisdom-driven. Discussion promotes the discovery of wisdom, and therefore durable and meaningful outcomes from our efforts. These are some of the things that should guide us as we travel together. So now I would quickly go into the presentation part, which would look at the building blocks. After all, the title of this presentation is Building Blocks. And what are these building blocks? I will talk about two for today. The first building block is knowing the nature of peace and conflict. It's very interesting. Many of us use the term conflict, peace. These words are very cheap, but rarely have we taken time to really look deeply into what they mean and what are the implicit things that are in them that should guide our behavior, particularly as we try to seek solution to conflicts. The first is many of us think peace is stopping war or violent conflicts. We see this now in our region, and everybody is screaming that there has to be peace. There is either war ongoing, or in other parts, war is in the making. And therefore, people are screaming that somehow these wars have to stop. And that's what is many people's understanding of peace. It is true. Peace is stopping war. However, that understanding alone is not adequate. One of the problems in this understanding of peace, especially the way we see it in practice, is it legitimizes the use of violence to stop violence. For example, when a war is going on, if one of the sides wants the war to be over, they have to muster superior power to break the back of the adversary so that once the adversary is defeated, then the conflict stops, and then peace comes. That's the prevailing notion. And therefore, the two parties are competing with each other as to who is going to dominate the other side, who is going to break the back of the other side so that the conflict will be over. Very seductive thinking. Or if the intervention is coming from a third party, like peacekeepers or peace enforcers, they also try to put together superior force to put pressure on the sides so that their violent interaction stops. Well, I wished this was an answer, because the experience that we have in human history has been that wars have only given birth to more wars. In the process of defeating the adversary, in the process of the kinds of things that we are doing to defeat the other side, we are only digging the ground to put seeds for the next war, for the next violent interaction, and sometimes passing it on to the next generation. As I said before, even if you break the back of the adversary and the adversary is silenced, it doesn't mean that they accept that situation. When you are gloating with your victory and the loser is licking his or her wound in the darkness in that corner, one is deceiving oneself to say that this is a peaceful situation. It's only a matter of time when those that have lost are going to amass sufficient strength to come back to take revenge. And the next generation could also say, well, these people, this group, the victors, humiliated our forefathers, our foremothers, etc., and now we are going to avenge their dignity. So it goes on and on and on and on. But we think we get relief, but that relief, if at all, is temporary relief. You know, the First World War, which was one of the most destructive wars in human history up to that time, which killed 30 million people, it used to have a nickname. The nickname was, "This is the war to end all wars." People were fed up of war, but they thought that now, particularly the forces that were fighting against Germany and so on, if we break the back of the adversary, we are going to create a lasting peace, because they won't be able to operate in this fashion again. Well, yes, Germany was defeated. Germany's back was broken, but it gave birth to the Second World War, not even 30 years after the end of the First World War. And the Second World War was even more destructive than the First World War. It killed 50 to 100 million people, according to some calculations. And the Second World War gave birth to the Cold War, which killed even people who shouldn't be involved in these wars from the Third World War and so on. And who knows what the Third World War might look like when probably life as we know it might be eliminated. Which means that trying to deal with conflicts in ways where one prevails, the other one loses. When one is silenced, the other one becomes the silencer. The win-lose situation might give us temporary relief, but it doesn't give us lasting peace. It always finds a reason to erupt, because the underlying reasons for the conflict are not addressed by that understanding of peace. So we talk about the second type of peace, which is peace means finding lasting solutions two underlying problems. This perspective has a major assumption under it, and this is that conflict doesn't just erupt from the sky. It doesn't come from the ground up. There is a reason why there is conflict. There is a problem underlying that conflict that needs to be addressed, that is screaming to be addressed. And when that problem is not addressed, that is when the conflict not only begins, but proliferates and turns into violence and becomes destructive. Therefore, if you want to have lasting peace, discover the problem under the conflict that's causing the conflict, find durable solution to it so that when the problem gets addressed, the conflict vanishes. It doesn't mean that all conflict will vanish, but at least that particular conflict will disappear. Which means, and this is very important, conflict or war is not a battle to be won, but it is a problem to be solved. I hope you hear me well. It is not a battle to be won, but a problem to be solved. In other words, if you look at it from the perspective of this definition, of this understanding, actually, conflict could be a wonderful opportunity to recognize there are problems in our relationship that need to be addressed. And this is true in interpersonal relationship. This is true in relationship between husband and wife, between parents and children. It is true between groups. It is true between nations. Conflict is an opportunity to indicate that there are problems that need to be addressed. So instead of becoming defensive and so on, you now sit down and recognize the problem and then work to find answers to that problem, to address the problem, so that all this violence, all this destruction becomes unnecessary. That is the approach to transform destructive conflicts like what we find in our region to more constructive ways of handling them. This is what the second perspective says. Now, in order to transform conflicts from the first perspective, the more destructive, the more short-term perspective, to the second perspective, there are some guidelines, and I would like to quickly share 4 of them. Number 1, if you have to transform conflicts from a destructive to a constructive relationship, if you have to handle conflicts constructively, one of the guidelines is look at the root causes of the conflict. Conflict is very deceptive. Conflict has symptoms and conflict has root causes. In many instances, we focus on symptoms, on what appears on the surface. When we work to address only the symptoms, for sure, we may not deal with the underlying problems, and therefore we cannot find a durable solution. Or, in some instances, we'll explore this by example later on, you might even make the situation worse than better. Just take a very quick example of malaria. We all know about malaria. We all know about the symptoms of a person who has malaria. Headache, knee, joint pain, fever, etc., etc. These are symptoms. And there are medicines for these symptoms. Ibuprofen, anacin, aspirin. You can take these things and you can be free from the symptoms. But does that mean that you are cured of malaria? Of course not. In fact, it might be the case that while you are not feeling the symptoms, the malaria is getting deeper and deeper into your system and eventually might kill you without you even recognizing the symptoms, because you have taken the palliative to deal only with the symptoms and not the root cause. The same is true in conflict situation. Look at the root causes, and sometimes they appear to be quite different from the deceptive symptoms that appear on the surface. Second, justice. When you are looking for durable solutions to conflicts, you have also to address the justice of the solution. In this particular situation, what I mean justice, among others, is procedural justice, which is inclusivity. Everybody to whom this situation is a problem must be engaged. They must be heard. They must participate not only in articulating the problem, but also in finding the solution, so that eventually the solution is not his solution, her solution, their solution. It's also my solution, because I have participated in defining it, in getting people to understand my perspective in this, and also in forging a solution that addresses my problem as well as theirs. In this, we consider, what is due to everybody by different standards, justice. The third is understanding. Justice alone is not enough, particularly legal justice. When we say justice, in many people's minds, what comes immediately to mind is the courts, is a third body giving a judgment about who is right, who is wrong. This side won, this side lost, and therefore case closed, conflict resolved. We have seen already that is very deceptive. The loser is not going to accept, as long as the loser does not accept the outcome. Even if a judge says you lost, they might be quiet, they might be silenced, but it doesn't mean that they are going to put the matter down. They are going to push it by various ways. Appeals after court judgments, appeal after appeal after appeal. In our culture, litigation, endless litigation, that goes sometimes from parent to children. That cannot bring durable solution. Justice has to be tempered by understanding, which is the third element. What do you mean by understanding? Understanding is, again, a word that has two levels. One is, let me say, we use the word understanding, but very rarely do we stop to examine the deeper meaning of understanding. When you look at the word understanding, it's composed of two words, understand. So literally, in a conflict situation, it might imply standing under somebody. What does that mean? In the context of conflict, what it might mean is trying to feel the weight of the other side, to feel the weight of the adversary. There is another term that they use in English, which is called put yourself in the shoes of the other side. When you put yourself in the shoes of the other side, when you are into their skin, then you get to understand that person. Actually, when I tried to translate this, by the way, one of the things is, I don't know whether you see this, I have written a book out of which this is derived and more, which is in Amharic, partly because I felt this could be of use to our people. It has been translated into Tigrinya. Recently, one person did it, and we can get the copies and make it available to people as well. And one of the things I did when writing this book, and by the way, this book is available at Amazon for those that might be interested in getting it. When you translate it into Amharic, the word is even more profound. I would like to, during the discussion, ask how does this word magbabat translate into Tigrinya, and to see if we can also derive the kind of insights that one derives out of magbabat. In Amharic, understanding is translated as magbabat. Magbabat comes from the root word magbat. Magbat means to enter. Magbabat means to enter into each other. What does that mean? Magbabat in this sense means when I enter into your heart, when I enter into your mind and get safe space, when you enter into my mind, into my spirit, into my heart, and you get safe space, then we say we have entered into each other. What does that mean? What that means is, when I begin to see the problem that you are seeing from your eyes, not from my own perspective and judgment, but for a time withholding my judgment and being open, just even for a limited time, to put myself in your position and to see, where is this person coming from? Where is their pain? Where is their anger? Why do they behave the way they behave? If I permit myself to do that, and then the other person permits himself or herself to do that, then in Amharic you say, Gabbain, Gabbain, it has entered me. That is understanding. That is magbabat. And when that happens, an incredible process develops that helps people explore options, explore possibilities for resolving problems which they might not have even considered or thought of before. And by the way, that is what is meant by listening with the heart. You remember earlier when we were talking about listen not with the ears, but with the heart. Here, it's the whole person that's engaged in understanding. And the peace that comes from there is durable peace. Our role in this journey is to help each other and to help those that need to be included in this journey to begin listening and talking with the spirit of magbabat, with the spirit of understanding. And you'd be surprised what kind of options become available. And I'm not saying this just out of, because I'm a professor and I'm professing some theoretical knowledge. I have seen it work. My experience has taught me that these things are not just ideal things that remain suspended in air, but if they are given the space, if they are allowed to operate, they can make a huge difference. Finally, Point number 4, mutuality. What do you mean by mutuality? Again, like the word understanding, mutuality has a surface definition. There is also a deeper understanding of mutuality. The surface one says quid pro quo, reciprocity. Give me a quid, I will give you a quo. The deeper understanding says each of us as human beings have our own interests, our own needs, our own expectations and aspirations. And that's legitimate, of course. But strangely, these needs, these interests, especially the deeper you go into the needs, they are interconnected. Life is a relationship, especially whether by choice or otherwise, you are put with each other as neighbors. It is always a relationship. So these needs, in a very strange way, are interconnected. And therefore, if you want to protect your needs, your interests in a lasting way, in a durable way, find a way of not only protecting your interest, but also helping the other side to protect their interest as well. Protecting your interest creates the opportunity for the others to do the same. And then you'd be surprised what kind of symbiosis this creates. This is the meaning of deep cooperation, of deeply working with each other, of peace. Well, this might sound a little bit too theoretical. One could say, well, humans are selfish and they take care only of their own, probably their own, and maybe the ones that they love very deeply, their children, their family. But as to others, let them take care of their needs, of their interests. I do mine, and somehow we coexist. Somehow the collective interest might be taken care of that way. Well, but again, like the other things that I indicated before, these are not prescriptions about how we should behave. Surprisingly, they are descriptions of how social life works. And maybe we can take a few examples to show how relationship, including the protection of our needs, are mutually reciprocal. Let me just take a few examples and then I'll bring this to an end. Let's take something like respect. Respect is so vital for being human. The respect of our dignity, self-respect, as well as respect from others, is so vital that sometimes for respect, we are prepared to kill or we are prepared to die. When you look at many of the conflicts, particularly ethnic conflicts, underlying many ethnic conflicts, there is a sense that I am not being respected. My dignity has been vilified, and I have to stand for my dignity. And sometimes that leads to very destructive behavior. So dignity, respect is important, but how do we get respect? If I go around telling everybody, look at me, you have to respect me, and I go around intimidating everybody, would people respect me? Obviously not. In fact, people would think that you are ridiculous. You have to be found to be respect worthy. I might frighten people because I am powerful, because I am wealthy. People can be afraid of me, but that is not the same thing as people respecting me. That is what people in power completely don't understand. They confuse fear with respect. Because people are afraid of them, they think they are respected. The problem comes to the surface when they begin to lose their power. When they begin to be weak, all those people that they thought were their friends, all those people that they thought, that would come to their rescue, abandon them overnight. A fantastic example, Mobutu of Congo, who terrorized everybody and made everybody quiver under their boots. He thought he was the most respected guy in the country. When he died, he couldn't even be buried in his own country. Some other country like Morocco, I think, eventually took him in, and that was where he was buried. Respect can be earned only by respecting other people. When you respect other people, people respect you. By your behavior, by your demeanor, by your thinking, by your attitude, you show respect and you earn respect. Which means respect is a reciprocal, mutually reciprocal concept. You give respect, you get it. You don't get it by demanding it. The same to love. Love is so critical in human life that if you don't get love, we'll just wither away and die. It's so important. But how do you get love? Again, you don't get love by demanding love, as many of us try to do. You give love and you get it. It is a mutually reciprocating system. Well, love, respect could be abstract, but how about concrete things like security? For security, again, we do all kinds of things to ensure our security. But how do I get my security, and how do I get it respected over the long term? If I am living with my neighbor and I'm threatened by my neighbor, and I build my walls high, I hire guards with guns, I get dogs that are as big as horses, so that my neighbor gets the message that he can not hurt me and get away with it. That's a way of ensuring my security in my way. Is that going to give me security? Obviously not, because the other side is not going to take it lying back. We're going now to get a guards with machine guns, walls that are even thicker and higher, and dogs that might even be bigger than that, and all that. This is what is called as arms race. With arms race, the tension builds. The possibility of explosion and the insecurity that it creates for both sides increases. The insecurity of my neighbor is also my insecurity. How do you get security? There is a famous saying by Abraham Lincoln that is very relevant for this. Abraham Lincoln said, do you know the best tool to break the back of your enemy, of your adversary? He said, the best tool is make your enemy your friend. If you make your enemy your friend, then he doesn't have any incentive anymore, unless he's kind of partially insane, to continue undermining you. Your enemy being a friend takes away your insecurity to that friend, and that friend's insecurity to you. Which means, if the security of your neighbor, the security of the other side is in your interest, in order to get the security that you want for yourself, give security to others, and in a very interesting way, it comes to you. Okay, security, how about wealth? How about wealth? How about economic development? How about prosperity? That is reciprocal interaction. If you are wealthy and others are wallowing in poverty and dying right and left, you can't even enjoy your wealth peacefully. You can't sleep at night peacefully, because those that are left out, those that are excluded, they are going to come after you at night. That is what urban crimes are about. That is what revolutions are about. The poor, the dispossessed, eventually going after those that have exploited the system to their benefit by excluding them. If you want to have wealth and enjoy it and live long enough to enjoy it, your wealth better be the source of wealth for others as well. If your wealth is at their expense, you are only digging your own grave, at least in the long term. If they are benefiting because you are benefiting, then they also help you to benefit even more. So give wealth, and in a very interesting way, you also get it. Finally, power. If you are in power, by making sure that everybody around you is powerless, you snatch the power away from them. And that's what happens mostly in many political situations in our region as well as in other parts of the world. Then, sooner or later, those that you have excluded from power are going to gang up, either together or individually, in whatever capacity they might have, to snatch that power away from you. Which means power then gets reduced to a struggle. That's what's meant by struggle for power. But on the other hand, if you have power and you empower others, you share part of that power with others. And those groups now become powerful because of you. They in turn are going to support you, and their support is going to give you more power. The more power you have, the more power you can share with them. Which means instead of one becoming powerful at the expense of everybody else, now we create a situation where all of us can share in that power and support each other for mutual gain and mutual benefit. That is a more sustainable way of exercising power. In other words, mutually reciprocal relationships imply give and take. Again, stop and listen to this word, the term that we use every day, give and take. We don't stop to examine their deeper meanings. Give and take. It doesn't say take and take. What it says is, in a rather ironic way, give and then you receive. In a very mysterious way, when you give, the return that comes for what you give becomes even more than the amount that you have given. When you look at some of these ancient wisdoms, religion, theology, philosophy, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, the Bible says, if you give, you get tenfold back. Which I never understood really. When I was a young boy and I used to read this, I said, well, this is just meant for, holy people. This is meant for people who don't have interest in the world. But no, it has a very strong application in the world we live in. The return you get gets compounded. You not only get what you have given, if it is material wealth, if it is money, even more than that in terms of deep relationships, deep friendships, respect for each other, trying to be in a situation where you become your brother's or your sister's keeper, and your brother and sister become your keeper. That is lasting peace. So eventually, concluding definition, lasting peace then means developing nurturing relationships founded on mutuality and give and take. When one's well-being and welfare becomes the source of others' well-being and welfare, the relationship between the two creates sustainable peace. Mind you, this is not saying forget your interest. This is not saying be just totally altruistic and think only of the others. This is not what it is saying. What this is saying is, yes, you have self-interest for sure, which you have to protect. All of us need to protect our interests. But there is enlightened self-interest. Enlightened self-interest says, while you are protecting your interest, while you are serving your interest, for heaven's sake, for your own sake, find a way of serving the interest of the others as well. Then you create a relationship that allows you to enjoy the interest that you are trying to protect, while the others do the same. And structural peace means creating, forging, defining political, economic, social structures that are based on these concepts of mutuality, mutual enrichment, and give and take. When that happens, we are on the way of building durable peace. To conclude, these are some of the features of what lasting and durable peace looks like. These are some of the tools, state of mind, attitudes that we can use to journey, to travel towards this sustainable peace. I hope we begin to apply them with each other and hope that we can include others to share this with them so that as they journey with us, we ensure that the obstacles on the way are minimized. Thank you very much for giving me the attention. Bye.
Thank you very much, Professor Skias. We really appreciate for your presentation and content of your presentation. And بحكي كلاتكم لما أنتم سنة متشهم كتوعلو جزيهم بموداكم بتعمي مسجن بروفيسور سكيل نايب حكنا مسجن نتصبغ تحسه بحلفقات مسرتاوي نجر كابتي ني كونفليكت كم تصوم مسرتاوي زغون ني كونفليكتن سلامن كم مسارحن كم مالت انتاي كم مسرتاوي كنا هنصلو متقوم الله مسارحتات بروفيسور سكياساس كم أميت أمنا له سلازي بتصحف ون كاب بناي ماسنجر بنكالن زمت أنزله بتعمي تناي بحكي بحلفي أبانا تساعي نزله إتي real cause نايت problem ويكا نايت conflict سلازي نفولتو فليتنا أخ نفتح سلازي نفتني تي ኮንፍሊክት ነባር ኮይኑ ዘሎ ማለት እዩ መፍትሒ ሲኢና ዘለና ስለዚ ኣብዚ ስነ ሓሳብ ናይ ፕሮፌሰር ማለት እቲ መሰረታዊ ንሰላም ድዩ ዋላ ነቲ ኮንፍሊክት ክነኣለና ንጥቀመሎም መሳርሒታትን ኣፍልጦን ኣብኡ ኣተኪርኩም ሕቶኹም ንክትሓቱ ናባኻም ኩመልሲ እየ ማለት እዩ ፕሮፌሰር እታ ሼር ሳብ ተትገብርዋ ምክንያቱ ሙሉእ ስክሪን ክመፀልና ማለት ቴንክ ዩ ቨሪ ማች ብጣዕሚ ደጊመ ምስግን ፕሮፌሰር ስለዚ እምበኣር ሕዋት ናባኻትኩም ኮፍተ እቲ ንሕቶን መልስን ምክንያቱ ግዜኹም ከይንውዳእልኩም ናባኹም ክገብሮ እየ ማለት እዩ اوكي إيدكم حاف كتبولون ده زيكيلكم ذا شجرة يكون ولا خصك تقبر تقول لهم ولا دم صوت تقبر لي تقول لهم إنجينير بينجا حافظ بالكلها نبغى إنجينير.
All right, thank you, Dr. Nagasi. Thank you, Professor Skill. Thank you for this very insightful presentation. I think this is the foundation of a very civilized society. So I'm so grateful to be here and to hear your insight. I've got two questions. The first question is, as a society, how do we move on from this war mentality into a peaceful mentality through the art of resolving conflicts through dialogue? So I'm speaking in terms of how do you bring a cultural shift? The second one is, do you see the need to revisit our curriculum and to upgrade it to, perhaps to equip the next generation or perhaps even the current generation through the curriculum to use this conflict resolution in the entire system? So I'm just thinking if there is a need for overhauling of the whole system and curriculum to use these techniques at the very early age. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Professor, you can go ahead and...
Okay. Well, thank you for the questions. How do we move as a society to bring cultural shift? Well, there is no easy shortcut to this because, as you saw from the presentation, the shift has to happen at many levels. The shift has to happen at the intellectual, at the mental level. The shift has to happen at the deeper value level. The shift has to happen at the political, at the economic, at the social cultural arena. And most of all, you cannot bring that shift by just expecting others or telling others to do it. It can come only by developing examples for those kinds of values and those kinds of behaviors that we have identified as necessary for durable peace. So I think the methodology that we are proposing to follow here is one of the ways to proceed in my mind. That is, if we just give prescriptions in the abstract and say, change curriculums or change the way you govern according to these principles, it doesn't have as much traction because, except the idea, they would not be encouraged or they may not be convinced that these things work. But if you present yourself as an example of a working model, then what comes as an example provides a tremendous inspiration for others also to attempt to change. So that is really, one of the things that I found, for example, very appealing to what you are trying to do in this campaign for peace. Because essentially, what we are doing, and now I feel I'm part of you, what we're doing is trying to show, trying to demonstrate by example that these principles we are talking about, we are applying them in our own relationships. And if this kind of attitude, this kind of perspective keeps expanding because we include more and more people, then I believe we can create a critical mass where other people begin to say, well, these are not just abstract ideas, but this can be translated into life. And these groups, by the way they are interacting, provide an example for that. From my experience, I have seen that those kinds of examples inspire cultural change than merely abstract prescription, writing a book, or changing curriculum, because words alone cannot inspire people to change. There has to be an example. And which means if, for example, this campaign for peace shows that peace is possible by trying to go across these dividing lines, by trying to create an opportunity to work with others and to say, yes, in name, we're branded as enemies. In name, we're on opposite sides. But look, that did not prevent us from working together. That did not prevent us from finding solutions to our region. And we present ourselves as examples. You would be surprised by how much an inspiration it could be. So, yes, revising curriculums would be very helpful, but just the abstract revision alone and lecturing about them by itself may not produce the results that we wish. So I really want to encourage more to keep this discussion among ourselves here, to just see how can we become models for the kind of model, the kind of change we would want to see in our countries, in our region. And then by inspiration, by example, we can inspire others.
Thank you. What comes to trio, Professor comes Golotwo Malati. Salam Nahna Riahalana, Darga Bakala Riahalana Kalaliat Messin, Gink Sakande, Tilazbele. بدحريو كدي سايد الزحازله تمالاليس كانتر إخايو ندا تمالاليس كان دحر داخل كومل فتيكها ساعة كندي تجوارا زحتتون مخانو زرقي السمريم بروفيسور لو معنتي ومنازلو نانوسيو كم تريو ترنافها زيناي وفر سلام ترنافه كم تزبلنا كم نيشتي كم تزبلو إكسباند ندا جبر نبوزحات سوات ندا مرأيان داخونه كاو حليفون كابتن هنا حبرة السب حليفون نخالم مرأيان دخونه كمون ناب إست أفريقيا ناب كالين كسع نا أفريقيا ناب عالمن إكسباند جبر بحاتيرو بوردر زي بلو مخانيو زرينا جن أنت بزعبو بزح مستزارب بزعبا سلام مست بريتش مستجبرنا نحكي مستمايات كاو حليفوها كمزي وفر سلام investment أبزي ترنافزي نقول زلنا بتكبر حويس كون بزعبا السلام ده حسب كاب حسب كسرحن كتوفرن كتفتن كلا خان السلام قالات فمهان لعلقول لجن مرآية ناي حبرة السمنة هنكون كم مهانا نعنا نتكلم نحبرة السمنة ونتكلم never been late كل جزء أبزر كاب كارلو جمهور لك نحنا جميرنا كنودو مالتونا يكونن from next generation ونزغط سلو سرح مهاني كابزي بروفيسور لما عنتي زبولنا جننتايو step by step أب كل درجات سلام ناي سلام مالت انتاي بلوكس كتهنس مستجمر وتصيتها أبنو يحتريو نجر مخانو سلازز حزنا يزلنا زنخور زلنا كيدها مزي بروفيسور لما عند حزام وزلو نايب حكي اكسايز قبريمو نايب حكي بروفيسور نايب حكي أنا مسجن نزجبركم وعلن نزتدالهم مدلاون بزترفقن نوح حزناكم سلازلنا بروفيسور ونوح حزناهم سلازلنا حدا خلت حتى كفكرمو نايتي نايم معلتنا خساي كنودينا لما عنتي مخنياتو بروفيسور لما عنت ترايز يكونه أبستفعل عليه تفعل عليه part 1 part 2 تندا تبعله خمسة قديمهم زغلوسو كموسونا سلازغونو زغاء صبغ ملالي خويننا له primarily نمللاي زموتيم كاب حجيجن عند ورارتنا عند حترنا أبستفعل عليه درجات كمورنا مخانمن كوا حليفون بروفيسور كم تزرع أهمو نويح زتوعزة توموكروز اللون بتكبر أبتفعل عليها جراز تساطفو بحلفها أب conflict resolution مالت destructive conflict زبهال كم يجركا ترديكا كم يجركا نعو minimize تجبر كم يجركا lasting peace فترة بزبل بزح توموكروز اللون كوا حليفون متحفت الصحافيهم كم قد بركات كمان كابت صحيفهم وزلوا متحفتي ني campaign for peace بزح كوبي سديدو ملنا له ناب فرقنا بسياتل كيدلو فرقنا ناب دالاس مصنا له حوات قدسات زخونكم كنسدلكم هنا كوا حليفون بتغرينيا ونترجم سلازلهم تزنغورهم بعل امازون كالينون سلازركب تي انفورميشن ابتناي campaign for peace platform ويكا messenger group viper group common whatsapp group share كم غورينا نتمصحف تقوملو جزء تباراتعهم نبروفيسورون بزقات أمزي نهنا مصحف بعلنا أنت زي جزيناو كابانا أنت زي تبجسو صبو مرآية سلا زي كونه ناي صحفتنا مصحف بعلنا هم جزء كنا باراتعهم بزقات أمزي بتحتنا لحدتكو نبروفيسور كا نزقبرنا زلو أقول بلوت بتعمها مسجندلي thank you very much professor سلازي ناب حدا ويكلت حتى تكون وسدمو نايلو ما عند خمليلا غيركم نخالق زي زلكم تاسكم تقروا كم تقولوا ندا نغركو نابهم كملسي تملي سحوا thank you حتى زلكم إلكم حاف كتبوا تقولوا اوكي اتو ماكله إلكم حافا بيلكم اللهم قاهيدا اتو ماكله
Thank you, Dr. Nagasi, and thank you, Professor Skell. I had an opportunity to talk to the professor. It is a perfect match to Wafr Salam or Campaign for Peace. I am so interested to hear what more he has to say, because this is what Campaign for Peace is. Campaign for Peace is created to look for ways to create sustainable peace in our region. And all his life, he have done this. I read his book. So many peace organizations have commented on that. Is internationally known. He had a huge experience on the things we are concerned, on the things we want to achieve. So I thought this was a very very good discovery for us and for him. He is interested as much as we are. We could help each other in the coming effort. He has worked with international organizations. That's a good access for him and for us. From my understanding, he genuinely believes in creating sustainable peace, and that's what we are. That's what our organization is. And I would like to thank again Professor Scale. He gave us books. So far, we have 10 copies. And I think the board of Campaign for Peace will decide how to use them. But as Dr. Nagasi said, please order this book from Amazon.com. It's very important. This is not an ordinary book. This is very important, especially for us, for Campaign for Peace members, because that's what we're trying to do. And it's a good guideline written by an expert, by a reputable, by experienced, by educated, highly intellectual caliber. So this is a copy that every member from our organization must have as a reference, because it encourages, it endorses what we're doing. So I read the book, like I said. I tried to see what leaders, peace leaders of the world commented on his book. It's very interesting. And it's a good resource for us. So I would like to say this. And I talked to Professor Scale for so many, I mean, for a few days. He's very genuine, very polite, very sincere. And I am positively impressed. And thank you, Professor Scale, for coming to our group and giving us a lecture, something you lived for and something I am sure you will live for the coming years. And we would like, I am very much sure we'll be partners in the efforts. Thank you again.
Thank you. Let me just say, Ato Makela, I really appreciate the role you played in connecting me with this group, because you were so key and instrumental in making this connection happen. Without you, I think we would have just passed each other at night without even knowing about each other's existence. And I appreciate very much that role that you played in bringing this working relationship, which I believe would be to the benefit of our peoples that have suffered so much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Ato Makela, for introducing us with very knowledgeable and it's a very good addition for us, and also will be a very good resource in terms of when we see peace scientifically and when we try to apply it wisely. So very important. Everything is said by Ato Makela on behalf of, I can say, Campaign for Peace, and thank you for introducing Professor to our association. And also, Professor, thank you very much for being here today and taking the initiative to be part of us, and taking leadership. Also, I'm sure you will take a leadership role as going forward with our plans, especially with our the plans we have in terms of how to apply and how to enlarge our association in terms of applying to our society and beyond. And at the same time, we are trying to enroll our society in different activities, including business and the other, maybe in the future, sport and alike. In this process, also, you may give us a lot of experience and examples from other countries that may be beneficial to our association. نايب حكي حوات كلاتكم يمسجن نذهبكم comfort ني بروفيسور إسكياس كاو حليفون يغني لي أتو مأكله نزق بسخايم نزوم فلات عابنا يانا نابزي ما أدزي ندقنا دمانعنا ريسورس كوننا كاو حليفون كم تزبل كات تزحفهم وزرلو متحف جزي وديو ብዙ ሐሳብ ተቀሚጦ ተገበረ ነገር ስለዝሆነ ከም ሪሶርስን ከም ጋይድን እንዳተጠቀምና ንሕናውና ንሕና እንዳተማሃርና ክንከይ ጋይድ ዝረኸብናሉ ከም ተቀዲመ ዝበልኮ ይኻ ቋዕ ጀመርና ያጥራይምበር መን ይዝቁጽሎ እዚ ስራሕ ናይ ምቅራብን ናይ ሰላምን ከም ትኩሉ ግዜ ንብሎ ኣይንፈልጥን ኢና ኩሉ ግዜ ጽቡቕ ትጅምሮ እቲ ጽቡቕ ሐሳብ ገፍሕ ንብዙሓት ከ እንዳጠቃለለ ኸይድ كم تزرعهمو بروفيسور إسكياس لما عند متيم سنة وعلم الله خمسين لهم كمتيم يلو من حاسبون يرو موخا مزنا هنا علامان مزنا هنا نصرح زلنا استتحازة كأو حليفون متحف صحافلو بزح إفرت زودولو فتيمنا يتسبنا نيرنا حجون قومي كابزنتين نري بزحات نحبرت السبنا حلفها بسلام بزح الصرح بزح تمكروز زرخو كالعقراتون كموسنا نزيو تتسميمنا نتنصرح زلنا نتفوق زلنا جزي أب زتكم جزي تف مهلاو تردينا ننحدنا مورال نتوهبنا نات دقاقفنا كنكيد نتني حبرة السبنا أمنت كنقول بزح أبزي أبن قبر الأوان ويكا كم زنجر أبن قبر الأوان بزح واقع خفلنا مخانو in terms of money in terms of time in terms of كله مورال كالن وزح نجر كخفلنا مهانو زروديو نزيد تصاويرنا جن نحنا من نسأنح وزحت لبامات أبتسركل ندام سنة نتسركل كمتي بروفيسور زولون دعبنا يا خم نخي أب حد أوان دما نتوم كاب إدنا منزعم سلام زسؤولنا زلو حيلتات مالت ويكا مرحتيلي ولا بجلتات نحنا خم حزبي إمباور كوينا مسأتهم ندارادرولون تقمنا نرجع بتصلوا أب متسايق أربعة خول مالتي أنت زي جميرنا يجن فتسيبنا ناب كنبت حين خلد سلزم تايو أبي بتحكي زي كونس نبي تخيل الله خاص لزغنة كل جزء تجمير زلوا بعزو نلقم فلاتاتن اللباماتن direction كتحزنا زغلو مور فلتز زلوا organized فلتز زغنة scientific فلتز تتحازز زلوا مداموتو نعنا ونقميتكم سنا مخانم تسفاز هبي بتعم زحقوسني أتو ويكا بروفيسور كومون دكتور سكياس نلب مع أنتم سنة مسمو على بروفيسور كاوم حليفون كالوت أبزي عودزي بزح تمكرو زلومن بزح فلتات زلومن عندام تون سمون نزنهنا جميرنا زلنا تسبي كم زقفحو تسفاز هذا معلتي مالتي تعمي بروفيسور نهنا أكل موهانكم متيهم ون تيزلكم في التتكيمكم نزي محبر زي مريحكم ناي حبرة السمنة تغمي زحلون تغمنا نلعل زمتسن كتبوا روم سنة بزقات أمزي إن دا عدنكو إن دا مسجونكو بزي شم ناي campaign for peace كمسجونكم كله سمعني حبس وسني بلون مالتي كمون أب قانقا متسخاها وايد رينج ناي قانقا تمكرو زلوم حونا كابتغرينيا أمحارنيا إنجليش ككب زودو لهم مرمى حتى تدخل لهم سلازي كونتاكت مزد لكمون مساي مساتو ماكله كمون أبتي ماسنجر جروب ناون كن حوسهم سلازونا اني تايم اوبنلي كونتاكت جروب تدخل لهم من الباش حدا حتى وي ريتو لكم نعهاتكم كبكم مو بزح حزناكم سلازلنا سفالالي سرحات كل سلازغل انا ونا مغشا سلازلو كنودينا مالتي كرم مودايغن اتليست حدا كساي كنوكم حدا سبع دلكن Okay. ስለዚህ حتوتات اندحر لكم كالن بار نخالق زي خونلناي بار ناي مጨረሻ عدلناي مزازمي ناي معصوي ني كور بروفيسور اسكياس عدل كيبي بروفيسور اسكياس closing remark for you please. Thank you.
Well, thank you. As I said, at least for me, this is just the beginning, not the end. And yes, you have traveled quite a bit, and I'm kind of a latecomer in this, but I feel extremely encouraged and hopeful just from what I see you stand for and what it is that you are trying to accomplish. Peace is a long journey and it has many obstacles and many frustrations, and I'm sure you have experienced some of them already, and we can expect more. But if we are going with determination, and really we don't mean evil or bad to anybody. Anybody is a beneficiary of peace, except those that try to undermine it. And even those that are opposed to it, if they only knew that there is no one to be excluded, there is no one to lose, there is no one to win, that in peace all of us are victors, then even the enemies will join. It's a matter of time. Sometimes it takes time to persuade them, to enable them to see that. But my experience also tells me that ultimately they will come to see it. We're going to reach a time, even in this crisis that we are facing, we are going to cry and weep on each other's shoulders, saying, without knowing it, I killed my own brother, I killed my own sister. The one I thought was the enemy was actually my brother, was actually my sister. And that is the truth. And what we're trying to do is to get people, to waken up people before they slaughter their brother and sister and avoid that unnecessary crime, because ultimately we have seen it over and over again that is what happens. So I believe what you have started here is a wonderful thing. And I believe that in order for it to be light for others, it has to also encourage others to see the vision and to see the light that you are seeing. And I think in that there is a lot of work that's expected of us. And with our mutual collaboration, I'm sure we'll get there. And I appreciate very much for you giving me this platform. And as I said, this is only the beginning and not the end. And I would like to thank you very much as well from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
Thank you again, Professor Esquias. Thank you very much for your time. And thank you until we see you again. Really appreciate for all your efforts. يغنيلنا كلاتكم لما عنتم سنة زوعلكم thank you وحواتنا من ناي مجرشة بزاناي كسايجرنا كنسانا بتينا مالتي thank you. اللهم سلام.
كبرات تخطاتلتنا أقدمكم زبو أفسرحكم أسالتوكم خا حقو سمعلتو من نبركم داتمننا وفر سلام ويكا بمحزنات قرابة تزفلت محبر ካብዚ ምስረታት ሒዙ ክሳብ ዝዓለት እዚኣ ኣብ ሃገርናን ከባቢናን ዘሎ ስግኣት ሰላም ብመጽናዕቲ እንዳለለየ ካብ ዝኾነ ዓይነት ፖለቲካዊ ይኹን ሃይማኖታዊ ነፃ ኮይኑ ኣብቲ ዝበዝሐ ተራ ሂወት እናመርሐ ዝኸይድ ህዝቢ እንዳተኮረ ዝተፈላለየ ንጥፈታት እንዳካየደ ይርከብ። ወፍሪ ሰላም እምበር ነዚ ብዚ ሕጂ እዋን ንዓለምና ኣጋጢምዋ ዘሎ ሓደጋ ኮሮና ቫይረስ ንምምካት ህዝብና ዝግባእ ሓበሬታን ትምህርትን ምእንቲ ክረክብ ናይ ሕክምና ክኢላታት ካብ ኤርትራን ኢትዮጵያን ብምውካስ ብመልክዕ ኮንፈረንስ ንህዝቢ ኣገልግሎት ኣብ ምሃብ ይርከብ። ኣብ ዝሓለፈ እዋን ናይ CPR ስልጠናን ናይ ድራር ምሸት ምስ ጎረባብቲ ኣሕዋት ዝብልን ካልእ ዝተፈላለየ ንጥፈታትን እናካየደ ኣብ መንጎ ዝተፈላለዩ ዝፀንሐ ሓዊ ጎረቤት ርክብ ኣብ ምድልዳልን ቁስሉ ኣብ ምሕዋይን ዝከኣሎ ተራ ይፃወት። ተግባራዊ ሓሳባዊ ስራሕ ኣብ ዕቤት ዝተመርኮሰ ኣብ ሰላም ዘለዎ ኣስተዋፅኦ ብምርዳእ ከዓ ኣብዚ ሕጂ እዋን ሰላም ኢንቨስትመንት ክለብ ብምኽፋት ጎረባብቲ ሓቢሮም ንመፃእ ዝዓለመ ኣብ መክሰብን ምውፋርን ይንቀሳቀሱ። ኣብ ሰላም ዝግበር ርክባት ማዕረ ክንደይ ውፅኢታዊ ምዃኑ ዘርኢ ብተግባር ኣብነታዊ ስራሕ ይሰርሑ። እዚ ማሕበር እዚ ብልባዊ ድሌት ሰላምን ራህዋን ኣብ ኣህጉርና ብዝምነዩ ግዴና እሞ ንግበር ብዝብል ሓቦ እኳ እንተተመስረተ ኣብ ሓፂር ግዜ ግን ናይ ህዝቢ ኮይኑ ነፍሲ ወከፍ ተዋሳኢ ሰላም ኣነ እንታይ ኣበርኪተ ዝብለሉ መድረክ ኮይኑ ይርከብ። ወፍሪ ሰላም ብዝተፈላለየ መንገድን ምክንያትን ናብ ስደት ዝወፁ ሂወቶም ዝተመዛበሉ ብምክንያት ሕሉፍ ታሪክ ፅልኢ ዝሓደሮም ዜጋታት ብምሕብሓብ ኣብ ስነ ሓሳብ ሰላምን ጥቕሙን ኣተኪሮም ንመፃኢ ዝሓሸ ዕድል ንምፍጣር ይመያየጥ። ንቅድሚት ዘሰጉሙ ሓሳባት የሰላስል። ኣብ ዝተፈላለየ ሞያን ትምህርትን ተዋፊሮም ሂወቶም ዝመርሑ ዜጋታትን ኣብ ትርፊ ግዜኦም ንኣብ ሃገሮም ዘሎ ሕፅረታት ዝሕግዝሉ ባይታ ይፈጥር። ኣብኡ ከይተሓፅረ ኣብ ሓበራዊ ባህልን ልምድን ነፃ መድረክ ብምፍጣር ጎረባብቲ ተፅዕኖ ዘይብሉ ኣብ ምክብባር ዝተመርኮሰ ርክባት ዘካይድሉ ዕድላት ይፈጥር። ኣብ ኤርትራን ኢትዮጵያን ብፍላይ ከዓ ኣብ ኤርትራን ትግራይን ቀንዲ ኣተኪርና ንሰርሓሉ ዝተፈላለየ እምነታትን ብሄራትን ኣለውና። እዚ ማሕበር ንኩሉ ብማዕረ የንገድ ዝኮረዩ ተበዲልና ዝብሉ ዝተፈላለየ ፖለቲካዊ ረኣያ ዝተቀያየሙ ኣብ ሕሉፍ ኣተሓሳስባ ደው ዝበሉ ፅልኢ ምንዛሕ ከም ጅግንነት ንዝቆፅሩ ወፍሪ ሰላም ከም ኣማራፂ ስነ ሓሳብ ሰላም ጥራይ ብምእንጋድ ንኣብ ደገ ዘሎ ህዝብናን ዛዕባ ሰላም ጥራይ ዝመያየጠሉ ቦታ ዕረፍቲ ሓንጎል እዩ። ነቶም ዶብ ከይተሓንፀፀ እንታይ ኣምፅኦ እዚ ንዝብሉ ወገናት ከዓ መልስና ንመንግስትን ፖለቲካውያን ኢና ንዝብሉ ወገናት ንሓድጎ ንብል። ከም ማሕበር እንጠልቦ እምበር ብዘይገድስ እምነትካን ፖለቲካዊ ፀጋእኻን ወለዶኻ ኣብ ሰላምን ጥቕምን ክሰርሕ ንዝብል ኩሉ እንቋዕ ድሓን መፀኻ ኢልና ብሙቕ ሰላምታ ንቕበል። ኣባላትና ዝተፈላለየ ድሕረ ባይታ ዘለዎም ኮይኖም ፅልኢ ዘድከሞም ብዓቕሚ ዝጎድሎም ግን ከዓ ብሽም ውድብ ይኹን ጥርናፈ ዝግበር ናይ ፅልኢ ቃልና ዘፈንፈኖም ረቐነ ናይ ፀለመ መጥቃዕቲ ዝኹንኑ ኮይኖም ሃይማኖት ይኹን ፖለቲካዊ ጊዶም ኣብ ቤትና ልክዕ ከም ናይ መስጊድ ወይ ከዓ ቤተክርስትያን ክንኣቱ ጫማ ከውፂኻ ናብ ፀሎት ጉዳይ ጌርካ ትውድእ። ኣብ ወፍሪ ሰላም ከዓ ናይ ሰላም ስነ ሓሳብ ጥራይ ዝእንገድ ከም ልምዲ ንፍሉይ ዝበለ ኣተሓሳስባ ብሕልፊ ኣብቲ ቀንዲ መዋድብቲ ዝኾነ ህዝቢ ኤርትራን ትግራይን ንነዊሕ ግዜ ኩናት ዘስዓቦ ከቢድ ባእሲ ንምፍዋስ ዝግበር ፈተነ ቀሊል ከም ዘይከውን ኣፀቢቕና ንግንዘብ። ንወለዶ እንዳፀብፀብካ ዝግበሩ መጥቃዕትታት ሸለል ንብል። ነቶም ትምወሉ ኢኹም ዝብሉ ኣበይ እሞ ክንረኽቦ ንብሎም። ነቶም ኣጋዝያን ትግራይ ትግርኛ ኢኹም ዝብሉ ዕላማና ንሱ ከም ዘይኮነ እንዳረጋገፅና ካብ ኣብ ጫፍኩም ከምዕዘብ ኣትኹም ክትርእይዎ መፍትሕ ዘይብሉ ክፉት ገዛ ሰላም እዩ ንብለኩም። በዚ ኣጋጣሚ ነዚ ቅዱስ ዕላማ ብምድጋፍ ኣባላትና ንክትኮኑ ብክብሪ ንዕድም። ኤርትራን ኢትዮጵያን ከዓ ተበግሶና ተረዲእኩም ኣብ ጎንና ክትኮኑ ንምሕፀን።